Now that, folks, was a complete team victory. That's what it looks like. So, Iowa 24 and Purdue 3 on the road. Big division win for the Hawkeyes, and we will discuss it and look forward to another big matchup because things are starting to fall in a certain direction that could provide some interesting scenarios come late November with the Hawkeyes and the Badgers getting together this Saturday. Welcome into our Hawkeyes live show. Welcome to everyone out there. And keep in mind that we're brought to you by Gene Arthur Associates. So please, you can check out their instant quotes on all things insurance, home life, RV, any motor vehicle. Grab the link in the description section of any of the videos. And of course, we only have a live show here talking Iowa football each and every Tuesday, courtesy our guy Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Hey, Corey.
Hey, Mark. How's it going now that we're 2/3 through college football? Are you mourning that now? Or are you? I mean, it's a busy time of year from a business standpoint for you, but what are your thoughts here in early November?
Yeah, from a business standpoint, it just seems like, somebody suggested the tagline to the Voice of College Football the other day for me as football never stops. So we may go with that. That's what comes to mind when you made that statement. So, sure. It's exciting. I'm excited to see the conclusion of the Big Ten Western Division race because now with Illinois upset at home against Michigan State, that opens the field up. If, in fact, Purdue can pull off an upset over Illinois this weekend, and then, wow, you've got 5 teams in play as it stands right now. And if I'm reading this correctly, the Iowa-Wisconsin winner, if they win out, would win the Big Ten Western Division.
If Purdue wins. If Purdue wins,
it's a little bit more complicated than that, though.
So Illinois has to lose twice.
Yeah, maybe I'm assuming a loss at Michigan, which I should not do that.
Okay. Yep. You're right. So you're right. Yeah. Isn't that incredible? I mean, the fact that Iowa has an opportunity, they still could win the West. I mean, this team was 3-4 a couple weeks ago, and by no means am I declaring that they're going to be Big Ten champions by, second week in December, but it's incredible. You got to listen. This is one narrative that I took away from our post-game show on Saturday, and it was kind of a brief show because I was in Indiana, and we'll have a kind of a part 2 of that show on Wednesday with Don Patterson. But one thing I took from that is there are some fans out there, and I get it because they're upset. They feel like they've been not listened to, and they haven't been for the most part as it relates to the Brian Ferentz situation. But there are some fans out there who feel like they can't give Brian Ferentz credit for anything. They just want him gone. They're just done with him. They want him gone. You're not giving him credit for anything. That's fine. I get that line of thinking. But the fact of the matter is, Mark, he deserved credit, or at least some credit, for what happened on Saturday because the offense, I saw you tweeting out about it during the game, Mark. The offense was functional. It wasn't great. It wasn't. It was not great. But Caleb Johnson ran for 200 yards. I mean, that's really good. Now, I don't think Purdue's defense is nearly as good as Minnesota's. I don't think it's nearly as good as Wisconsin's. The numbers indicate that. It's certainly not as good as some of the teams Iowa played earlier this year. But the point is, Iowa did what they needed to do. The defense was absolutely phenomenal again. I made the comment on Saturday, I think this has a chance at being the best unit Phil Parker has ever put out on the field as it relates to the entire defense, not just secondary, the entire defense. Because where's the hole right now, Mark? They're down Justin Jacobs, who's a future NFLer at linebacker. They haven't missed a beat. They are just rock solid everywhere. And Charlie Jones got his on Saturday. I was happy for Charlie. I have nothing, no will against Charlie. I stuck around Ross Aid for a few seconds after the game to see what players went up to Charlie Jones, and he had a lot of Iowa players go up and give him a warm embrace, and that was good to see. I'm not going to comment on the Jack Campbell. I don't know if you saw this, but Jack Campbell grabbing Cooper DeJean during the game, basically telling him not to help Charlie Jones to his feet. I don't love that. I mean, I'm not trying to be critical of Jack Campbell, but it is what it is. I didn't love that. My point is, I think for the most part, um, he was embraced warmly by his former teammates. I know he's got a lot of friends on this Iowa team still. So he got his, and he got over 100 yards again. Another Purdue receiver. I mean, Braum has had one Purdue receiver every single year exceed 100 yards, but boy, it was a totally different story than we've seen in any game since Braum. Even the 2019 game that Iowa won was close. This game was never close, Mark. It was never really in doubt. Um, the play calling was odd. I've praised Jeff Braum on so many different occasions for his ability to call the right plays at the right times. Why on God's green earth do you run 4 pass plays from the goal line, regardless of weather? Let's just throw the weather out for a second. 4 pass plays. When they had ran the ball effectively with Maccabee to get inside the 5, and they run 4 pass plays and don't get points. I just, that didn't make any sense at all. I'll tell you this, I've been a part of 2 games now this year, because I've only been to 2 games with, the post-game show. It's hard to make it to a lot of these games. Been to 2 games now this year, and in both games, the home crowd was booing its own offense. I mean, I was at the Nevada game, and they were booing Spencer at the time in the Iowa offense, and then, the Purdue crowd was booing its team on Saturday at times. So very strange, but you've got to give Phil Parker tons of credit. You give Brian tons of credit for finding a way to, whether it's Brian or not, he is the OC, right? I mean, we're going to place blame on him when things are terrible, then give him some credit when things are okay. And they ran the ball effectively. The offensive line seems to be developing some rhythm, albeit against a bad team in Northwestern and an average at best defense in Purdue. And yes, I had some people say, well, Corey, you said they were a really good defense. I never said that, Mark. I said it was an improved defense from what we saw against Northwestern. And guess what? Saturday against Wisconsin, that's an improved defense. And if you look at total defense, the week after they get Minnesota, that will be another improved defense. By the numbers, Minnesota's a better defense than Wisconsin right now. So the competition continues to ramp up over these next 2 weeks, and how fitting it is that this division is hanging in the balance with all of these teams still in the running.
So this is what's possible when a great defense is complemented by a functional, strong offensive performance. Now, this offensive performance was not prolific, but I think it also has to be credited that it did not have to be. In this type of game with this kind of defensive performance, which is the standard, doesn't have to be prolific. It needs to be efficient and on occasion explosive, on occasion, but not even consistently explosive, just capable, efficient, a 13 for 23 day, 192 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. That is a very strong day. I know that the completion percentage is not extremely high, but of course the wind and the rain had something to do with that as well. But that's a good passing day. It's a lot of yardage out of that many completions, and of course no turnovers, the 2 touchdown passes, and of course what Caleb Johnson was able to do with combination, it being him from what I saw, but also of course the offensive line gave him enough of a crease most of the time to make something out of nothing. And we talked about this a number of times throughout the offseason, that and then I think more so once we got into the season and saw Caleb Johnson play, that he was the guy that earned and would have the highest ceiling at that running back position.
Absolutely. And we said that back a year ago when he was getting ready to sign. We made the comment that, hey, they got 2 really good backs coming in there. And I actually like Jazz Patterson maybe a little bit more than Caleb Johnson when Jazz committed. And I'm still high on Jazz Patterson. I think he's probably, I don't know what the future with the 2 Williams backs is going to be here. But Jazz Patterson got his first carries of his career on Saturday as well. So, and let's not forget, he's a true freshman. So both of these guys, they are the type of running back that you want. I had a couple of friendly debates with people on social media because people were asking, well, could he be the next Shawn Green? He's a totally different player than Shawn Green was. And yes, it's far too early to be anointing him as the next great thing. But I do think he's got the potential to be as good of a back as Shawn Green. I use the term plotter. People didn't like that. I'm not the only. You've heard that term, right, Mark? You've heard the term plotter as it
Oh,
relates to
sure.
backs in the NFL that at times get to a point in their careers where if they don't have a ton of help from their offensive lines, they're not getting yards after contact. And Green, as great as he was at Iowa, within a couple of years in the league, and I know the Jets' offensive line wasn't great and the Titans' line wasn't great. He was kind of a plotter towards the end of his career. The way that Caleb Johnson runs, we've made the comparison to Eric Dickerson. He's got that long stride, very smooth, but he's got the jump cut. He's just a different kind of back. I mean, that's just kind of what we've been saying for a year now. He's just a different back than Iowa has had. And I don't know anybody to compare him to. And that's a good thing because he's unique. And boy, I'd love to think in a couple of years what the 1-2 punch with him and Jazz Patterson could be if they can retain both of those guys in this era of the transfer portal. But you're right. The offensive line was better. They opened up holes. And again, his ability not only to get yards after contact, but he's starting to show that quick twitch that I thought he had, but that early on in the year he kind of just ran in a straight line, right? And if the holes weren't there, and he could lower his shoulder, but he didn't have much of that. He wasn't demonstrating that quick twitch, and he started to do that on Saturday. And wins Big Ten Freshman of the Week, wins Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week. Tremendous honors for a young man who became the workhorse on Saturday, and I don't think he's looking back. I know Kirk said in his press conference today that LaShawn Williams and Gavin Williams were both banged up. So maybe that's the case. They both played on Saturday for the record, but they were both banged up. I think it's clear now based on what we saw on Saturday, what we've been seeing, and go back to the Nevada game, Caleb Johnson is the man moving forward. And it seems like Connor Colby's playing better at left guard. Logan Jones still struggling at times at center, but playing better. Richmond's playing well. It seems like that left side of the line is playing as well as it has all year. Yeah, I mean, as Kirk said today, that was the most complete performance the entire year, and that includes the Northwestern game because the competition was so much tougher. And the question now becomes, how does Iowa handle this unique front that Wisconsin throws at you? Because they've traditionally struggled against that 3-4 defense. So if they go out there, Mark, and dominate Wisconsin, I won't. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say at that point, Mark. I mean, what do you say at that point?
Well, I think we've just been open and honest and told the truth about what the production has been, which has been abysmal. But now, you certainly said it well, that, this is the type of offensive production that's required for this defense to be a complement. So we talked a number of times during the offseason about what the identity of this team is and what it could be with complementary football, what true complementary football looks like. This is it. The identity of this team will still be elite defense. This is the only defense in the country that is giving up less than 4 yards per play. Elite special teams play, and an offense that is a threat, that maintains possession of the ball, doesn't make mistakes, but also produces first downs and points.
Is it the best defense in the country, Mark? You tell me, yes or no?
No. It's close. Georgia.
Okay. And you and I both know, I'm not arguing your point because you know more about Georgia than I do, and that's why I was asking you the question. But you and I both know that Georgia has not dealt with an opposite unit like Iowa's defense has had to deal with.
Sure.
That's what makes that number so impressive. The fact that they're holding teams down. And Kirk even brought it up today. He kind of today I think he felt a little bit more comfortable addressing the elephant in the room. He was asked about that yards per play stat, and he basically acknowledged, the offense hasn't really given the defense any help all year, and we finally got some help this week and last week. But what they're doing is unprecedented. He said, I really don't have anything to complain about on defense. What is there to complain about? Like we said this after the Ohio State game, Mark. They put up 54, and it's like we walked away saying, man, that defense was really, really good. Like CJ Stroud, the throws he made had to be perfect. And, they couldn't run against Iowa. And on Saturday, Purdue couldn't run well, they didn't run. I think they could. I think that's one issue. If you're Brom, you look back, I think they're going to regret not running the football more. But even with the wind, they could not run that offense. They could, they got the ball to Charlie Jones. They hit one ball over the top to Charlie. But again, that was on a perfectly thrown. It was a beautiful throw from O'Connell out of his own end zone down the field. That was a gorgeous throw. But those were few and far between. And unless you can execute to the level that C.J. Stroud executed against Iowa's defense 3 weeks ago, there aren't going to be teams that can score points. And so what you just said is what we've been saying for how long now, Mark? We've said this offense doesn't have to be great. It just has to be decent. I don't even think it needs to be average. It just needs to be slightly below average to have a chance to win the West every single year. And last year they were bad and still won the West. So, and now I think the defense is better. And heck, Mark, the offense is worse, and they may still win the West. I mean, let's make this clear. The idea that Illinois could lose 2 more and Iowa wins out, that's not that outlandish. Iowa gets Wisconsin at home. You get Minnesota on the road, which will be difficult. You get Nebraska at home. Illinois gets, as you said, Michigan, who you assume they're going to lose to, and they get Purdue. That's the game this weekend. If you're an Iowa fan, you still have hope that this team can win the division. You're watching Illinois and Purdue, and then I think they play Northwestern, right, in their rivalry game last week of the season. You never know in a rivalry like that what Pat Fitzgerald's going to pull out of his hat. So it is fascinating. I'm still not predicting that. For the record, I still believe – I don't know that I believe that Purdue – I pegged Purdue as my favorite. Who would have thought, Mark, that heading into the year, who would have thought that at this point in the season we'd have 4 teams tied at 3-3, and they'd be Wisconsin, Purdue, Iowa, Minnesota? You may say, well, we all could have predicted that. Well, no one would have predicted Illinois being above all those teams. I mean, those were the 4 teams we had thought, okay, it's especially with the schedule advantages that Purdue came into the season with. We thought at least I thought those 4 teams are dead even. I don't know who to predict. And the one thing we missed was Illinois. So it is fascinating. It's kind of the conference tends to this conference race and the division race tends to shake itself out, and it's certainly doing that so far.
It just struck me, just as you were going through the standings there, that I have hope that my preseason prediction is now in play with Wisconsin winning the division. I had given up hope a long, long time ago.
Yeah, I mean,
not that I'm rooting for them. That was just my preseason pick.
Well, I pretty much I said a few weeks ago, I'll admit it, I said Iowa's not winning the West, and I stand by that. I don't think they're winning the West, but it is possible, very possible. And if you had to guess would you, I mean, obviously if you're a betting man, you probably take Illinois, just given the fact that they're up a game in the standings. But do you, Mark? Do you, given the schedules, do you take Illinois at this point?
If Purdue was playing as well as Iowa or Wisconsin is, or even Minnesota right now, but Purdue is reeling. I hate to pin it on one guy or on one situation, but they haven't been the same since Aiden O'Connell got hurt. Aiden O'Connell hurt his ribs in the game prior to FAU. I forget which game I think it was the Syracuse game, which he just lit up the Syracuse defense. Right. He had an Aiden O'Connell kind of day, almost 500 yards passing. He missed, they held him out of the FAU game. Then he came back and they changed their play calling to accommodate his limitations, and he hasn't been the same. That said, I watched probably 2/3 of this game, and even a healthy Aiden O'Connell, most of the time, I'm sure he would have been slightly more effective, but most of it was not him. Most of it was him backpedaling, throwing with an Iowa shoulder pad in his ribs. He was just under siege most of the game. The Iowa defensive front, I think, won this game, large part.
Let me push back on you for a second. Not saying you're not right. Maybe O'Connell is suffering, but he was pretty darn good against Nebraska. He was 35 of 54 for 391 and 4 touchdowns that day.
Yeah, I didn't see a whole lot of that game. I don't know how much of that was downfield throwing. I know that I watched the Minnesota game after he came back from the injury, and they very much limited his throws, the types of throws.
You're right. I just remember watching that Nebraska game and thinking, man, this dude is incredible, because he was making
He is.
And some plays out of the pocket that impressed me, and Nebraska's defense. I mean, I think that's the big variable, right? Even maybe a slightly unhealthy Aiden O'Connell can still perform at a high level against Nebraska's defense. But you're right, the margin for error against Iowa's defense, and given the weather. When I was at that game, I've never experienced wind gusts like that at a football game, and I don't know what it was like on the field. But we had debris, trash, debris, cardboard boxes flying through the stands. At one point, I shielded a friend of mine who was there with us because I thought he was going to get hit in the head. It was weird. I mean, it was a weird day. And I know you were obviously invested in that Northwestern Ohio State game, which I did not watch. I ended up going to Chicago the next day, but I'm assuming the Windy City was even windier on Saturday. And that probably contributed to Ohio State's struggles. We don't have to get into that real in depth, but I'm sure it was very comparable to what we saw in West Lafayette.
Yeah, they inexplicably tried to run their offense under those conditions for a while. Then they adapted, and it was a little bit different. But they're a very pass-heavy team, and that hurts them under those kind of conditions, which could hurt them down the stretch, primarily in one particular game, because I don't think they're going to be threatened in the other two. The one concern for Iowa fans in a rooting sense is that this Purdue team is not playing very well, and I don't see them going to Champaign and winning. However, these teams seem to turn on a dime, meaning a few weeks ago, Purdue was the team that was playing well, and they went to Camp Randall, and all of a sudden Wisconsin, the team that was playing poorly, turned their season around, blasted Purdue, and Wisconsin's been playing really well ever since. So,
well, we could also say the same thing. We could flash back 3 weeks prior and heading into that Purdue-Minnesota game, people were saying, it looked like Minnesota was by far the better team. Purdue's coming off a close win to FAU, and you mentioned the injury to O'Connell, and what does Purdue do? They go up, and I know they didn't run the offense the way they normally do, but the defense shut Minnesota down, and they win 20-10. So, yeah, it's been a really weird year of ebbs and flows. My question is, Mark, do you still, at this point, do you trust Illinois yet? Like, no. I know they're 9 games in. I still don't trust them completely.
No. And that's not a knock on them. They're just not at the level. There's only a few teams in the country at the level that you can pretty much trust that they're just going to take care of business, regardless of whether they've got their A game. No, they showed us on Saturday at home, and that's not a game that I was surprised by in any such way, because Illinois has a bottom 3 to 4 roster in the conference. They've done a remarkable job, Brett Bielema and his staff, in preparing this team and fashioning their approach in such a way to take advantage of what they do well and to hide and mask what they don't do well. But they played probably a more talented roster, even with 8 players suspended on Saturday, and they lost the game. And they were really outplayed significantly. It was a 23-7 game with 2.5 minutes left, and they put on a furious comeback and almost pulled it out at the end. They had it down in the red zone, down a score at the end. But Illinois, they're coming back to the mean. They're coming back to, being substantially a better team than they've been the last few years, but not some team that's going to race out and go 10-2. And that's just not them. They're not that good.
Now, before we transition to maybe some talk about Wisconsin, and again, we're going to have Don Patterson on tomorrow night on this channel and over at our sister channel from the Hawkeye of the Storm. But can we talk about Houston SMU? Have you ever seen it? I didn't watch it, but I was following it on my phone, Mark.
Remember your audience. This may be a shock to their system.
Let me just, for anybody who missed the Houston, I'm just going to, don't tune off. Let me just read you. These are the drive results for the game. All right, Mark, you already know this information. SMU starts out with the ball. Here are the drive results, alternating back and forth between the two teams. Touchdown, 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 interception, touchdown, interception, touchdown, 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 missed field goal, touchdown, touchdown. Oh, I'm sorry, end of second quarter. Touchdown, touchdown, turnover on downs, punt. Touchdown, 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 interception, end of game. They had one punt, Mark. How did, like, you know how Iowa fans felt? I mean, you don't know exactly, but you have an idea of how Iowa fans felt after the South Dakota State game, where your offense literally just can't do a darn thing. They don't do anything really to help. They don't do anything to help the result, and yet you still find a way to win 7-3 because of your defense. That has to be how SMU's defense felt. They gave up 63 points and won by 14.
As an Ohio State fan, the last time I remember really feeling as though, I'm watching an offense that is so anemic. This was in the 87-88 season, and they're scoring like 20 or 25 points a game. And I just thought this is just unbearable, horrible to watch. But yeah, 77-63. It's similar to when I heard that Wake Forest turned the ball over 6 times in one quarter. And similar to me hearing when I heard that Appalachian State scored 6 touchdowns and North Carolina scored 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. 10 touchdowns were scored in one quarter. I think, how is that possible? 77-63. How is that almost mathematically possible to squeeze that much scoring into one football game?
Well, I don't know the numbers in front of me, but we're talking about Purdue. Let's go back to the Music City Bowl last year, because I watched that game, and Mark, that was just bomb, 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 right? I mean, just there, whether you want to talk about explosive offenses or defenses that are completely inept, there are extremes on both sides, and hopefully Iowa's figuring out a way to perhaps become a bit more balanced.
I'd like to remind everyone that Hawkeyes Live here each and every Tuesday at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central, brought to you by our fine friends at Gene Arthur Associates. Grab the link in the description section of any of the Iowa videos, and you will find the link to your instant quote. Also, for this month, as we get close to the finale against Nebraska, which could have a ton on the line, you can still win Iowa-Nebraska tickets there in Kinnick Stadium, courtesy Gene Arthur Associates. What you need to do is go to Facebook and Instagram, look up Gene Arthur Associates. I'll leave the link in the live chat as I do each and every week. Go to Facebook and Instagram, simply like, follow, and share, and you're automatically entered to see the Hawkeyes in Nebraska and possibly Iowa playing for a Big Ten Western Division championship. But first, they must get through the Wisconsin Badgers, and we appreciate Nick Snow stopping by from Bucky's Fifth Quarter on SB Nation. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Well, it's a similar narrative for you Badgers as for the Iowa Hawkeyes in regards to where did this come from? People counted you out about 3 to 4 weeks ago. The team's playing much better. All you have to do is look at a box score, and when you see Graham Mertz 5 for 18, albeit against windy conditions, not picking up Graham Mertz, but 200-yard rushers, and then, of course, a defense that bottled up one of the best offenses in the Big Ten. That's Wisconsin football. Wisconsin football's back.
Yeah, hey, I was not surprised that they ran the ball as much as they did against Maryland, a team that, really hasn't played its best ball recently, I wouldn't say, at least. And it seemed like the weather conditions really played out perfectly for Wisconsin to dominate that game. They saw kind of a breakout game from second tailback, I guess you could call him, Isaac Arendo, who has kind of had his moments throughout the years, but he's also been banged up a lot. And I think his emergence really helped Wisconsin kind of really just dominate that part of the game. And Braylon Allen, he's been a little beat up this year. And I think Hawkeye fans will see that this weekend. They're exchanging running backs a lot more. And Braylon Allen last year, he was averaging like 25 carries a game. This year, he's more like 20 or 18. So things have changed a little bit, and I think there's a more balanced approach.
Where would you, Nick, where would you place Braylon Allen's health right now? Is he 75%? Is he 90%?
I believe it's a shoulder injury. So I guess I haven't heard exactly where he's at, but I know he wasn't on the injury report this week. So I think you can expect that he'll be a full go for Saturday. But again, it wouldn't shock me to see him have a few less carries because of it. And again, it's shoulder or elbow. I saw him kind of take a couple of hard dives into the turf on Saturday, and it was almost like he had hit a nerve or something. He was holding his elbow like that. So he's definitely, I mean, you could definitely tell that something's off, but for the most part, I mean, his legs and stuff, they appear to be fine and maybe a little bit healthier than they were this time last year.
Nick, give us an idea of the dynamic shift, the change in dynamic, if you will, since Paul Chryst was let go. Obviously, that was just a few weeks ago. And with Jim Leonard switching to a head coaching role, obviously changes the dynamic not only on defense, but also on offense. There were rumors, at least that I heard. I don't know there was any substantiation to these rumors that Paul Chryst had this, I wouldn't say marriage to Graham Mertz, but that's the only word I can think of, where he was kind of set on Graham Mertz, and fans were kind of like Iowa fans for a while, wanting a change at quarterback. But we haven't seen a change at quarterback. Why is that, and how is the dynamic shift? How has the dynamic shift since Leonard took over?
So I'll address the point there about the marriage between Paul Chryst and Graham Mertz. I actually had heard it another way. I heard that it was actually John Budmeyer who was the one who was really pushing, and you guys know John Budmeyer's name because he's now on staff at Iowa. But I had heard that he was the one who was really high on Graham Mertz early, and that Chryst was actually planning to play Jack Cohn in 2020. But Jack Cohn in training camp in 2020 went out with an ankle injury. Graham Mertz has that game against Illinois and goes off, and you can't just change him out as soon as Jack Cohn's, it was kind of like if you go backwards, Graham Mertz's chances of leaving are a lot higher. And I think that scared probably the people on the coaching staff. So you had to stick with what you had. And Mertz has been pretty good this year. And I'm not going to go too far down this road yet, but he's improved, I would say. So Iowa fans should probably expect to see maybe a little bit more consistency from him. But to your point about the change this year, I mean, it's been fascinating to watch play out. This was a season with pretty high expectations that there would be a rebound. And I heard Mark say earlier that his pick for the West was actually Wisconsin. And I also had Wisconsin in my as my winner. I also had Illinois as my loser, the last place in the division. And look at how that's turned out. So, that Washington State game, the second weekend of the season was interesting. It was one of those games where Wisconsin really beat itself, something they haven't traditionally done. And it was kind of a red flag for a lot of us fans, like, okay, what's going on in Madison? Why hasn't this team played consistently? It's now been, you could say 2021, they were inconsistent. 2020, they looked awful a lot of the time. What's going on? That was really like and we kind of excused them for 2020. We excused them in 2021 again because they were right on the doorstep of the Big Ten West, but they couldn't finish it out against Minnesota, and they looked horrible in that game here in Minneapolis, which is where I'm actually located. But yeah, I think that Washington State game was the first red flag for Badger fans, and then you followed it up with a pretty bad performance, a team that looked very underprepared against Ohio State, which was jarring because this was a team that, a couple of years ago was right there with Ohio State to win the Big Ten. That was 2019. They were up 2 scores at half. So there was a lot of questions circulating at that time. And then you turn around and you play Illinois, a team that's projected by many to finish last in the Big Ten West, and they come out and lay an egg. And for all intents, I mean, they were tied at half, but the second half, there's this, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but Paul Chryst allegedly drew the line in the sand, and the effing sand is what I think he said. But they came out and they fumbled the return, first play of the half or second half, and it was history from there. Illinois now looks like a really good team, but at that time, I think Chris McIntosh, before he made his decision, was thinking, this is not a good team. And I think they are still a good team. I just think that they're really hot and cold.
So just give us an idea, Nick, of the decision-making behind the Chryst move, because I just don't buy the fact that, and I'm not saying that you're implying that, I don't buy the fact that the move was made based solely on Ohio State getting blown out to an Ohio State team that blows a lot of teams out, and one bad loss, or even if it was perceived to be a really bad loss at the time to Illinois. There's just, to me, Paul Chryst had built up so much immunity that move didn't make any sense to, I don't think many people. It certainly didn't make sense to me. Kirk Ferentz, I know, really respects Paul Chryst. I think he's gunning for Wisconsin this year, partially because he didn't like that they let his friend Paul Chryst go. And let's not forget, Budmeyer is a part of the Iowa staff. So if there's any extra motivation from Iowa, it might be because of Wisconsin letting Chryst go. Just kind of give us an idea of what your feel for the move is at this point, now that we've had a few weeks to digest it.
So I've been thinking about this a lot. In 2017, Wisconsin had that 12-0 year where they went to the Big Ten title game and they were knocking on they were going to be a college football playoff team if they would have won that game. And they were down one score with one possession left, and Alex Hornibrook threw an interception, and it was, over. And then 2018 rolls around, and there's really high expectations because this team was returning a really good offensive line. They were returning Jonathan Taylor. They had Jake Ferguson. You were expecting a good year out of Alex Hornibrook again because he played so well in 2017. And they came out and they lost to BYU in a game they never should have lost. And that was, for me, that was the point where it's like, okay, why are we losing a game against BYU at home in September? There was no reason to lose that game. And then it's kind of been that way for a couple of years. That's the first loss that really kind of was like, that's a bad loss. And then 2019, when you have Ohio, you're playing Illinois in Champaign, you lose after leading most of the game on a couple of really bad plays. A fumble, I can't remember if it was a fumble or an interception, but Wisconsin had the ball at the end of the game and was ready to put the game away. And for whatever reason, they turned the ball over. Illinois goes down and kicks the last second field goal and wins the game. That was a really bad loss.
Not to interrupt, Nick, one of the great point spread upsets in recent college football history, it was like 32.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. It's bad. It was one of those red flags for me again, where it's like, okay, this team again had no business losing this game. And there's kind of been one of those a year under Paul Chryst. And then in 2020, you could probably say that Wisconsin was really down the COVID year or whatever, but they still didn't play well.
And they down like every quarterback on their roster at one point in that year.
Yeah, in 2020.
Yeah,
Jack Cohn was. Yeah, Graham Mertz had COVID at one point. They were down to Chase Wolf. I think that Chase Wolf, he played the majority of that Minnesota game that they won at home with no fans. But I think that Badger fans still take a lot of pride in ripping the axe away from Minnesota after they had taken it from us. And so, yeah, I think that there's just been one game a year under Paul Chryst that was just not good enough. And Wisconsin was built much like Iowa on not beating yourself. And in these games that they've lost, they've beaten themselves, especially against Washington State. They had like 10 penalties for 100+ yards. Completely unacceptable for a Wisconsin team that historically has been really, really disciplined. And it's been a problem with the offensive line. One of the reasons why the offense has struggled is when the offensive line is getting drive-killing penalties like holding and false starts. I'm sure that Iowa fans can relate in some regard because I know that their offense has stalled at times this year. But yeah, I feel like there were games that Wisconsin was losing that they shouldn't have lost under Paul Chryst. The other point I'll make is that recruiting right now, the team has the best roster it's had ever. There's the most 4- and 5-star recruits on this team right now. But Paul Chryst comes out this year and you're not beating a team like Washington State with a second-year head coach who, quite frankly, doesn't have a lot of talent on his team. You can't beat that team at home. And then on top of it, you throw in the last couple of recruiting cycles where they've had like 12 or 13 guys come in and they've been ranked in like the 30s and the 40s, which is a regression from where they were in 2019 and 2020, which was their best recruiting classes ever. So I think that all of that stuff has kind of been like, okay, something's got to change. I think that's what went through Chris McIntosh's head. And the last point I'll make on that is that we're entering a new era of college football. I think we've all kind of discussed that at length, the NIL, the transfer portal, all that stuff. And I think that Wisconsin took a good hard look, and Chris McIntosh took a good hard look at the program and said, okay, where is this program headed? Well, they're headed in the wrong direction, and it's got to be changed quick. Otherwise, they'll get left behind moving into 2024 and 2025 when you have teams like USC and UCLA joining, and who knows what other teams might be joining.
Nick, final question for me, and then I'll just let Mark take this away. Can you give us an idea for the average fan who, doesn't watch this 3-4 defense every week, and we're used to seeing at Iowa 4-down linemen and your 3 linebacker defense, and Wisconsin throws something totally for at least for Iowa fans, somewhat foreign. Now they see it against Iowa State, but can you give us an idea of why that causes teams problems? Because it certainly has been a crutch for Iowa.
Well, I think the key is that Wisconsin has historically been able to get home with 3 guys at times. And, a lot of the times that's like an outside linebacker like Nick Herbig, who's been a real stud on our defense this year. Keanu Benton's been a stud at nose guard. Getting home with 3 is a really important part so that the coverage scheme works out, but that also allows you to kind of run stunts and blitz linebackers at inopportune times for the offense. So I think it starts with being able to get home with 3 or 4 guys to begin with. And you'll see the linebackers, the middle linebackers, especially Jake Chaney, Muma Jongmeta, Jordan Turner, those 3 guys primarily rotate. You'll see those guys blitzing inside later as the game moves later and later through. You'll see those guys making Spencer Petras uncomfortable, but I can't say I know very much because I didn't watch the last 2 games, but my understanding is that Iowa has improved drastically, especially in the run game. So if they run the ball well, I would expect that Iowa would be able to be pretty dynamic in the pass game. But
if they run the ball well against Wisconsin, Nick, I'll be very surprised. No disrespect to Purdue. There was a bump up, but that run defense for Wisconsin, Iowa hasn't been able to run against Wisconsin. They ran against Wisconsin in 2020. It was a weird year, as you mentioned, Wisconsin's issues, but Iowa has not ran the ball well against Wisconsin for a decade. I don't know. I'd have to look back at the numbers. I don't even think in 2015 they ran the ball very well. That was the fumble at the goal line that opened the door for Iowa to win that game and maintain its undefeated record. So, Mark, anything else?
Yeah, maybe I'll stay on here with Nick if you need to go, Corey.
Okay.
Thanks for being here.
Appreciate the time, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks, Corey.
Corey's going to be back here tomorrow night, both here and from the Hawkeye of the Storm at 9 Eastern, 8 Central time. So catch him post-game part 2 with Coach Don Patterson. So please join him then. Nick, so I don't know if you necessarily covered this when you went through the Chryst dismissal and everything that led up to that. My thought at the time of the firing was, yeah, this seems a bit drastic, especially since Wisconsin, kind of in the mold of Iowa, seems like a conservative program, one that's going to stay with side-on stability more than making a knee-jerk reaction. That at the same time, I was looking at the elevation of Jim Leonard, that they, number one, didn't want to let him get away. Number two, wanted to see how he would lead the team over the course of the season, and thought, okay, now is the perfect time to give it to him. And we fully believe we're going to go forward with him. But if things don't go well, then we still have the option to look elsewhere. Does that pretty much seem like where we are?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I would sum it up, right? It feels like this has been a tryout period for Jim Leonard, who, he's kind of a hot commodity as far as defensive coordinators and maybe head coaching jobs moving into the offseason if Wisconsin wasn't going to be the place he was at. And I think that there definitely was part of this was definitely Chris McIntosh and some of the upper donors looking at the program and saying, okay, we got a guy that we know can be, if he can lead a program and show us that he can lead a program, we think he's going to be good for a really long time because he's such a smart defensive mind. And I think that they could not sit there and let another program rip him away. And then especially the trends, like I talked about earlier, the trends, the 8-4 seasons where Wisconsin fans would have loved to see a little bit more of the 2017 team, going 10-2 or 9-3 is even better than going 8-4 before a bowl game. And I think that the McIntosh probably looked at that and said, okay, I have an option right now. I have an excuse. He's lost 3 games. They've only beaten New Mexico State and Illinois State. I have an excuse to fire him and see if Jim Leonard's the guy. Otherwise, we'll go in a different direction. And again, I think this has a lot to do with what's coming in the future for college football. I think that's what you have to look at it, because Chryst he's for as good as a coach as Chryst was, he was a great coach. He stabilized the program after Gary Anderson left. A program that had historically recruited linemen very well was not recruiting linemen very well when Gary Anderson was there. Chryst brought those linemen back in the state. He had really good coaches around him, and you can see that because he hired Jim Leonard, who's consistently had a top 10 defense. But they just had to make a move. Chryst served his purpose, was what I think happened, and it was either move on into the new era of college football or kind of see the same 8-4, 7-5 seasons, which I don't think Badger fans really appreciate anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, while it did seem a bit startling because the coaching firings that we had seen leading up to that were guys that clearly were not meeting expectations. And then you see Paul Chryst, who's gone to 3 Big Ten championship games, is winning like 72% of his games. And you think, that's Wisconsin. Isn't he pretty much meeting their expectations and in line with what we've seen up till now? But, you make a good point about where we're headed in terms of college football, division realignment, possibilities there. USC is a monster. UCLA has the potential to be a monster. And suddenly you go from vying for 3rd or 4th best program in the conference to, with the likes of Minnesota catching up, Purdue possibly catching up, to slipping to 7th, 8th, and just kind of being lost in the abyss of mediocrity in the conference.
Yeah, that would have been a problem. I mean, see, that's why I think it's okay that they moved on from Chryst. Now, I'm not saying that the midseason firing was warranted, but they clearly wanted to look at Leonard, right? And they didn't want to do it without any sort of resume to back it up. So, yeah, I really think that you've seen Minnesota, Illinois, and Northwestern teams that Wisconsin thinks they should beat. I wouldn't put Iowa in that category because there's been a good back and forth for years between these two programs. But I think that you see those other teams making, serious ground up on Wisconsin, and Minnesota especially. That's a troubling one because Minnesota and Wisconsin, there was a streak of 20 plus years, or maybe it was crazy how many straight times Wisconsin had beaten Minnesota. And you're going to tell me that PJ Fleck, who I know Iowa fans will share my disdain for, you're going to tell me that guy is the one who knocked Wisconsin down into the mid part of the conference. So I think that McIntosh looked at it and said, we got to make a change because otherwise I don't know if we're going to be able to catch up again.
Hawkeye fans, get yourself prepared for Saturday's big game. Catch Nick's work at buckysfifthquarter.com. buckysfifthquarter.com. That's on the SB Nation platform for Iowa or for Wisconsin athletics. And Nick, we appreciate you stopping by. I would desperately want to wait one more week until we try to weed through all the Big Ten Western Division scenarios because they're just too many to try to sort through at this point. But maybe one more week to see who wins, who loses these 2 big games in the Western Division to then figure out, okay, then we can possibly carve a path out the last 2 weeks and figure out who needs to beat whom to sort this mess out. But it is quite interesting, if not elite by any stretch. It's quite the division.
Yeah. I think that Illinois winning the division would be the greatest upset. I mean, if you had odds on Illinois winning the West Division this year at the beginning of the year, I have to imagine you have a pretty nice payday coming your way. I for one don't believe that Purdue is going to beat Illinois just because of what you talked about earlier. Purdue hasn't necessarily played very well, and Illinois has got a nasty, nasty defensive line, and I think that they're good enough to win the West. And that's another point. Illinois looks like Wisconsin did, 3 or 4 years ago, where their offense is going to do enough to win games, and their defense is going to, make sure the opponent doesn't get anywhere near you know what I mean? It's complementary football and something Wisconsin hasn't played in recent years. So I think it's going to be Illinois. I think that this weekend between Iowa and Wisconsin should be really, really interesting. And I don't know that we've talked a whole lot about the game, but I'm expecting a lot of punts and the winner of the turnover battle to likely win, which is normally an indicator of who wins this game. But I think that Wisconsin has a really good shot to make it to a good bowl game. And I think at this point, a lot of Wisconsin fans would celebrate that as a win, given where we were just 3-4 weeks ago.
Well, if you believe in Vegas, and they typically know what they're doing, they're basically calling there with an over-under of 36, and we see this weekly here with Iowa, always in the mid-30s on over-unders, that Wisconsin wins this game, 1917, I guess, is Vegas' call on this one. So pretty much sounds like it's in line with what these two teams produce on a weekly basis. So again, Nick, we appreciate you stopping by. And again, everybody check out Nick's work on SB Nation's Bucky's fifth quarter on the Wisconsin platform there at SB Nation. Thanks a lot, Nick. Appreciate you.
Hey, Mark. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, folks. Once again, want to remind everyone that you can win tickets to the Iowa-Nebraska game. Go to Gene Arthur Associates on Facebook. We have posted the link. It's both in the description section of all the videos, and it's also here online. I'll drop it in there one more time. Go there, like, share, and follow at Gene Arthur Associates on Facebook, and you're automatically entered into an Iowa-Nebraska ticket giveaway. 2 free tickets to Iowa-Nebraska, the final game of the season. And again, that's at Gene Arthur Associates, our sponsor for our Hawkeyes live show. Corey's going to be here on Wednesday night at 8 Central Time to do another post-game show, this time with Coach Don Patterson, and preview the Wisconsin game. And you will see me here in about a half hour. I'll be live on most of the Voice of College Football channels, on all the channels that have teams that are impactful in the rankings. So we're going to have a big watch party at 7 o'clock Eastern Time for 2 hours, 7 to 9 Eastern. Watch party at the Voice of College Football for the College Football Playoff rankings. So join me then and give me a call. We will see you in a half hour over on the main channel. And then we'll see you again next Tuesday, 4:30 Central.